Welcome to DME TV. I am Ambrish Saxena and I am with your program DME Dialogue. And as you all know, DME TV is a flagship YouTube-based channel of Delhi Metropolitan Education. And under this, we produce and present number of programs. So DME Dialogue is one important program that we produce with people of substance, people who would have done something remarkable in their life and who would have contributed something substantial to the society. We invite those people, they belong to different walks of life, and we interact with them to give some new light, some new dimension to the existing knowledge. And today we have with us Professor Jyotika Ramaprasad, who is a media educator and researcher from the University of Miami, US. Welcome, Professor Jyotika, in DME Dialogue.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saxena. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So to begin with, we would like to know about your early life. I mean, what all happened in your making? Whose contribution was there when you took your vital decisions in life, your early life, your early education, which finally molded you to take the next step?
Well, I would have to say that I think the most important influence on my life has been my parents. I had a very happy childhood. I was encouraged to really study well. I was brought up to believe that I could do whatever I wanted to, that my gender was in no way an obstacle to it. I come from a family of two girls. I have one sister. So, and both of us were brought up that way. My family very much believed in social justice. And so those values were inculcated in us, not so much by speech as much as by action. We would just see our parents' behavior, and from that we learned a lot about equality and diversity and so on. As I grew up, I was a voracious reader, and so were my parents, particularly my father. And so if you gave me a few books, I needed nothing else. And my father encouraged that a lot. You know, the only gift I wanted for my birthdays was a stack of books. And those days it was not so easy.
So what all you were reading in your childhood?
Well, I was very fond of reading fiction, of course, you know, from when I was very little. But my father introduced me to a lot of things that normally at that age a young girl wouldn't be introduced to. I would remember also him listening to the news and reading the newspaper, telling me things like about the, occupation of East Germany and about the Berlin Wall. And this was all when I was very, very young. I was not particularly interested in politics, but, you know, those memories still must have molded me because I remember those things even now. As I grew up, because I was a reader, my parents had given us complete freedom in choosing what we wanted to study. And so it was a natural for me to go into English literature. So I studied, got my bachelor's and master's in English literature from MS University. And then I went on to work for the Indian Institute of Management as an editorial assistant.
So from all your education, as you said, happened, but then during your childhood, were you confined to one place, or were you traveling around and trying to know something about the country?
Yes, my father was an army officer. And so I was very, very fortunate that almost every 2 years we moved around to a different city in a completely different region of India. So the language would change, the educational system would change, the extracurricular activities would change. And so I kind of identify myself in those days as an Indian citizen. I never identified myself provincially. And because my father was, I feel like 100 years ahead of his time, he would make us go, like when we were in Wellington, we had to go to horse riding school at 5 o'clock in the morning For 3 years, we learned how to ride horses, and we would ride horses and play the piano. And then we moved to Jhansi, and their classical Indian dance was important, so we had to learn classical Indian dance. So it was just one of those things where, I think as I said, I was very fortunate.
Yes, so I mean, you have made a mark in media education, but then taking a clue what you are telling us right now, what all your interests, which obviously would have generated in your early age with regard to singing, dancing, playing piano and all, if you can tell us something about that, particularly the things which you might be carrying even today.
Yeah, so, given that we moved around so much, there was lack of continuity in many things, because whatever was available there, we had to do it. But I think altogether, the synergistic influence of that was that there were no gender roles. We never grew up with gender roles, that a woman has to do only this. That is something that has influenced me throughout my life. The fact that my parents put me in myself and my sister in so many different activities, taught me the value of, engaging with different aspects of society, learning new things all the time. Even if you cannot pursue it completely, you just go ahead and learn something new. So I think it kind of generated in me a very lifelong curiosity. And I think that that even is with me today. And even after I finished my PhD and became a professor, I would still take classes in other departments to learn something new. And I still sit in other classes because I have this curiosity. And I think that was because of all these influences in my life.
So you refer to this gender role things, and in Indian society, despite whatever changes have happened, we are still in the phase of transition wherein the role of the gender or the status of women in the society, it is yet to be decided as to what exactly it should be and how much space we are ready to give to women. So if you look at the things which happened with you 50 years back, and what is happening today, I am talking this particularly in the context of India, and since you are in the US, if you can relate it to this as to what exactly is the situation in the United States, particularly regarding this gender roles and the space for women.
Right. So, I'm happy to see the changes in India that are taking place, but I still think we have a long way to go. And I continue to be an activist in my very small way within family and friend circle about or when I teach, I try to bring that in all the time. Even in what I did here today, I was making, in the last 2 days, I was making sure that I communicated to the class and even to the male students that women are equally important, if not more important, because they are the life source of all human beings. And so that is something that I feel very strongly about. I meet a lot of resistance at times in Indian society about my views, but that does not deter me at all. As far as the United States is concerned, of course, there's this, they had this huge movement, women's equal rights movement and so much. So, I mean, I don't think I have ever faced, I wouldn't say never faced it, but definitely faced much less gender discrimination in the United States. A willingness of my colleagues, particularly in my first university, which is Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, I felt that my gender or the fact that I was an immigrant, that the color of my skin was different, made absolutely no difference in the way I was treated there in that particular university. Unfortunately, of course, if you follow the news on the United States today, you know that abortion rights have been, eliminated, and that has been a very sad thing for many of us, who believe that a woman should have the right to determine her body.
Don't you feel this is very strange, because in a country like India, we have given this right to women, and a developed country like US is not giving that right?
Oh, I find it really, really aberrant. And it's interesting because my sister is a OBGYN in India, And she was shocked when she heard this. And she said, how is it possible that particularly when a mother's life is at stake, or when you know that the child is going to, have a problem throughout their life, and that is no reason to abort the child. So I'm not suggesting that that should be the case, but that is going to cause death to the mother, because of whatever problems the fetus has. She said, how is it possible that even in extreme cases like that, or in the case of rape, for example, a woman has to carry a child? And so she was shocked when I talked to her about what was happening. So yeah, it's an extremely sad, sad day. We have a conservative Supreme Court right now. I mean, a majority conservative Supreme Court in the United States. And this is just how it is. But I've been reading the Times, and the women, one of the articles the last 2 days is women are all rived up to vote much more in this election, because you know the stakes of bringing Republicans back into the majority, and already our rights have been taken away, and we fear that more rights will be taken away.
What exactly is the equation? Because sitting outside US is sometimes it becomes difficult to actually to go into the crux of the thing. So what exactly is the equation between the government in the US and the judiciary, and what exactly is their role in handling this issue of right to abortion?
Right. So the US is set up where all branches of government are supposed to be independent and are supposed to be a check and balance, right? So that so if, for example, the executive branch oversteps in some way, the judiciary is there to kind of, make sure about how the laws are executed, right? But what happens for the Supreme Court is composed of justices who are appointed by the party that is in power at that time. And it has just so happened that the Republican government has been in power whenever there are, in the recent past, when some of the seats have become vacant in the Supreme Court. So naturally, given particularly the conservative 4-year period under President Trump, naturally the move has been towards appointing judges who are, or justices who are more conservative. So, so that...
I understand, yeah.
So,
so coming back to what we were discussing initially, so moving forward to know more about your life and about your work, how all this happened that you decided to move to the US, whether initially you went for getting higher education or your research, and how did finally it happen that you settled there?
So, I got married in India to somebody who I met at the Indian Institute of Management, and he's I would say, if there's ever an academic, he is an academic. His life and his soul and his heart belongs to academia, and so he really wanted to come to the US to do his PhD, and so so he applied, he got in. We came. I was already expecting my first child, so I decided to stay at home, and meaning to stay at home in the United States. It was a difficult life. We were on very, very small assistantship money in those days, and so we lived, I would say, 3 to 4 years in complete poverty, which was a shock because we came from a reasonable middle-class family in India, and then my husband got his first job, and I said, I would like to go back to India. And he said, okay, we'll go back in 3 years. You just finish your PhD, and I want to get some job experience. And so where he got his first job, I applied for my PhD, and I got my PhD there. And then what happens is you have children there, and then you say, okay, maybe I'll also get a couple of years of experience. And then it's too late, it becomes too late. But I have to say that even to this day, unlike probably many Indians who come there and who find it much more liberating, for me, I had that liberating experiences because of my parents here. I didn't feel I needed to be in the US to explore my potential. And I just have such an amazing family, extended family, and the love and affection that they provide so willingly and that we share. I don't get that in the United States, you know. And so my heart is here. I mean, even though my body is in the United States. So I won't say that my experiences in the United States have not been exciting. I probably wouldn't have got to do the kind of work I have done. But it comes at a cost.
So when you initially moved to the US, in your initial years, what was your experience with regard to the changed social settings, with regard to culture, whether you received some cultural shocks, because most of the time this happens if people from developing countries are moving to countries like the US, then they find a lot of trouble initially. So whether something of that sort happened in your life as well?
Yeah, I would say it happened. I think the big, of course, you know, language was not a problem for me, so or my husband, so that was not an issue. The culture shock, I think the biggest shock was the sudden fall in our economic status. That has nothing to do with culture shock, but you know, that was really a big shock for me to have to live like that. But culturally, I think the biggest shock that I felt and I continue to feel is the fact that, you know, in India, we still have these wonderful relationships, right? We go out of our way to help our neighbors, our friends, our family. We are a collectivistic society where I am I because of you. I am not I because of me. And while that's a very individualistic society, and everyone, I think to a large part, I would say, looks out for themselves, you know, their career, their work. People don't have time because, you know, obviously there are other reasons, because, you know, you don't have the kind of help so easily that you get in India, that you don't get it there. So people have to take care of their own kids. They have to, you know, cook their own dinner and whatnot. But still, I think there's something really missing in that society. And that is this care and affection that we have that, you know, is just incredible in India. Yeah. So I think that is the biggest shock for me, and it continues to this day, and it particularly is true in Miami, when I moved to Miami.
Yeah. Initially you're talking about this equity, you said, justice, you said, and then now you are making this comparison between the US and the Indian society. But if we look at all progressive movements, like if we refer to the latest things which are happening, we talk about diversity, inclusivity, equity, everything starts from the West, and then in India or in other developing countries, we are following it up. So in today's context, looking at this whole concept of diversity and equity and justice and equal rights to everybody, irrespective of race or gender or whatever we call it. So if we make, if we tackle these kind of issues in contemporary times, and we try to understand this in the case of developing countries like India and the West and the conditions which are there in the United States, how will you define and interpret it?
So, you know, I think the US, there is a lot to learn from the United States. And while I feel that there is something lacking there too, you know, which is for me is a big issue, there is a lot for us to learn from the United States. And I think the fact that these ideas, I mean, not that they never existed in India, but I think they have come back with force now, and we have learned a lot about some of these things. And maybe now we can set an example in women's rights on abortion to the United States. But yes, certainly the US has offered us quite a bit in terms of ideas of freedom. Ideas of we've always had a free press, right? And it's in our constitution in India. But you know, the U.S. has a really free press in the sense that, you know, they have the First Amendment where the press is really protected. And so so those are some ideas that you know are good for society. While I don't believe that there should be freedom of the press without some responsibility, I also believe that there is no role for government and politics in press. So those are some ideas that I think are very important. Equality, and I think, like, to give you a personal example, if I'm not mistaken, I think one of the best examples I can give you about this is that my sister's granddaughter, who is now about 13 years old, started to play soccer in the boys' team because there was no girls' team in soccer. And she was really upset that girls did not have a team. And if I'm not mistaken, I think she became the captain of the boys' team. And that inspired other girls in her school to start playing soccer. And then she formed a soccer team in her
women's team.
Yeah, but in little, girls, school girls team in her school. And now they go to tournaments and stuff like that. And she's always kind of giving talks about how she was inspired to do this, and how she's upset with FIFA because they don't give they give much more importance to male soccer, and she gives talks about those things and things like that. So I think the new generation of young girls that is growing up in India has so much more opportunity. Parents now know that, girls should be given these same freedoms and these same liberties. And to some extent, I think that might be some influence coming from foreign countries, not necessarily only from the United States, So it's difficult, as you know, to parse out influence. But yes, we do have at least something to learn from the Western countries and the United States.
Exactly. That's really, in any case, because the whole thought of liberty has come from the West, and which is acceptable in almost all democracies of the world, irrespective of developing and the developing countries. Now coming to your forte, because you have been into media education and research for I believe more than 4 decades or so. So it's really very, very long experience that you have, and it's not only again that you have been working only in the US, you have been traveling around, as we all know. So can you tell us something, your experience as you look at yourself in the field of media education and research, the work that you have done in the US and in other parts of the world?
Yeah, so I came into the field of communication because I had, as I said, I had a master's in English literature. And I felt like I needed to diversify a little bit, and because I had done academic editing in the Indian Institute of Management, I'd become very interested in a lot of the projects that the faculty in IIM did had to do with farmers and things like that. And that was always something, because my parents had been very social justice oriented, it was something that was very close to my heart. And so I thought that, okay, maybe I can get into communication. And so while, the school I went to was called journalism, I'm not a journalist. I've never been trained as a journalist, but I'm interested in studying communication as a discipline, and, how we communicate and how journalists communicate, and how communication particularly can be used in social justice. And so that is my passion, is communication for social justice. Unfortunately, in the United States, there aren't many programs. It's such a big field in the developing world, right, about what we call development communication. But it kind of stayed in the developing world, or what we call the global south now, because it was felt that these were the countries that had been colonized and needed to, quote, to develop. And the US was already developed, right? Of course, now there can be a long discussion about what development means, but they talked about it only in terms of economic development.
No, but if I interrupt you here, because I myself have a keen interest into all these development issues, development aspects, obviously in the light of what happens in India. So as an academic person, how do you define in the simplest term development? Development, or as you call it, social change, whichever way you look at the whole thing.
So I definitely don't define it as economic development. That's very clear in my mind. I think about it in terms of human development, in terms of social justice for all communities, all genders, and in terms of the fact that if we think we want to bring about social change, we need to understand that social change has to be generated from grounds up, and that we cannot impose views of other people and other cultures and think about Westerners as experts, including me, right? I mean, if you consider me a Westerner now, as experts, and people that we are, quote, trying to develop as people who don't know anything. So my philosophy is very much that communities and local knowledge are important, that opportunities have not been available to these people for various reasons, and that doesn't mean they are not intelligent or they don't know how to, quote, develop themselves. And so I come from the point of view that there should be respect for local knowledge, local communities, that they should own anything that we do in terms of social change work. It should be participatory. It should focus on human development, respect, and things like that, rather than think of development or social change as externally imposed by an expert who comes from somewhere else and who thinks that they know it all. So that's how I feel about social
so
change.
I interrupted you. In fact, I asked you one major question that I am interested in knowing more about your research work that you have done in the global perspective.
Sure. So, so unfortunately, as I said, you know, this is not a major discipline in the United States. So it was very difficult to kind of break into it, right? And naturally, as a researcher, and I'm always excited about new ideas. So when I started to teach advertising, I became interested in doing advertising research related to other countries, right? I just somehow had this global perspective. I think the only thing I can say is that from childhood I had it. And I think one major influence was that one of my father's very good friends was very excited that I was one of the only children he knew in India, including his own who were not like me, who read all the time. So he would subscribe to the National Geographic for us, and he would send it to my father's place. And as a child, I would just open that magazine and keep looking at all these pictures of the world. And, you know, it was very ethnocentric. National Geographic was, you know, ethnocentric at that time. And they would show these pictures of people from Africa, you know, and, you know, in living in their natural habitat, in their natural being, you know. And it just fascinated me. And I thought, oh my gosh, the world is such an interesting place, right? And I think that must have had something to do with my interest, particularly in Africa. I mean, that's the only connection I can find. And of course, my father listened to the BBC World News and things like that. So when I started doing my research, whatever field I was in, I wanted to do it globally, you know. So I started working on advertising in Japan because I became interested in how culture influences communication. And the Japanese are collectivistic societies, and they speak in completely different ways from the way Americans speak. And then I was interested in graphics and design and how those change depending on where you come from. So culture became a very important part of how I thought about my work. And then naturally that meant I had to go to all these different countries to explore their cultures and learn about them before I ever did a project. And then I got very fortunate because through my contacts that I made globally, I got invited for my first major project to do it in Vietnam, which was on flood preparedness for Vietnamese people who lived near the water. And that kind of, you know, I went there and it was just a fascinating experience. So after that, I knew that I would have to figure this out on my own, that it was not going to be something that I would get a lot of support for in the United States. So then I made my contacts and I would think of projects, and then I would apply for small funds here and there. I went and did something in Macedonia. I did a lot of work in Africa. And then along with that, I became very interested in studying journalists around the world. So my first major journalism project was in Tanzania in East Africa. And then I just continued to go back there. And so, yeah, I think the world is just such a gorgeous, beautiful place. And people around the world are just fantastic. And I just, you know,
So you have been working so long, so passionately, but now, I mean, since you have worked so long for 40, 50 years, what you feel is still left which you want to do?
I think I really want to expand my work in communication for social change and global social change. And I've been very fortunate for the first time in my career to have a new dean who is interested in this also. And so we are just launching in the US, in my university through my school, a new master's program. It's going through the approval process still in communication for global social change. And so, you know, I'm hoping that the opportunity is increased in maybe whatever few years I have left in my career to really focus on that, to get PhD students into our school who are interested in global issues and global social change. Our dean is very globally and internationally oriented. So I think in the next few years, I hope that, you know, I can contribute my whatever with a lot of humility and modesty, whatever little I can, I hope I can make that contribution.
We all are looking forward to that, because there are people in media education, the young people, including me, who look at you as to what all you are doing, so that we can also learn with whatever you are doing. So to conclude the program, the last thing that I would like to refer to, we are having this conversation on 5th of September, which is celebrated in India as the Teachers' Day, because it's the birthday of Sarpalli Dr. Radhakrishnan. So you are here with us on this auspicious day, and you have been into media teaching for so long. What you would like to say on this day, particularly as a media educator, as a teacher?
Oh my gosh, this is such a beautiful day, and I wish we would hold it in the United States too. I walked onto your campus today, and every young person and, you know, that I met who was either a student or a junior faculty member was just full of smiles and, you know, full of happy Teachers' Day, happy Teachers' Day. So this tradition of honoring your teacher, your guru, that we have in the Indian culture, I think is a very important tradition. And I'm not saying that, you know, they have to bow down to us or that they have to overlook our faults, but there is a lot of grace and a lot of affection there, and I really appreciate it. So having said that, what would I tell you know, students who are studying in media? I would say, as an educator, my hope and dream for all students is to, along with making their careers, to always do a little bit of good for society, that think about this world as something that you come to for a very short period of time, and leave behind a little footprint. It might be a small, tiny footprint, but leave it behind where you have maybe done a little bit of good, maybe educated a girl child because the parents couldn't afford to educate that child. Maybe just gone and distributed pens and pencils, you know, where these are not easily available. Maybe going to a village and, you know, trying to make some policy change in you know, in the fact that water is not easily available to women and they have to work so hard to get water. But most important of all, I will tell media students, and in fact all students, we are facing a major crisis, and that crisis is climate change. Yeah. And please, I would ask all of you, request all of you to please pay some attention to what's happening to this world. Let's leave behind a better world than than we have at this time.
Yeah, you very well received, Professor Jyotika. Whatever you said, there is a need of making consistent effort, and it's a responsibility of each one of us to do our bit to make this world a better place for living in. Thank you, Professor Jyotika Ramaprasad, to be with us and spare so much time to talk to us as part of DME Dialogue. Thank you. So, this was Professor Jyotika Ramaprasad, who was talking to us as part of this DME Dialogue. Keep watching DME TV.